What's up, brothers and sisters? It's your brother G World 7_D back with the book Ancient America and Notes on American Archaeology. All right, back with this book again. All right. First of all, I'm gonna say like I usually say, I do not identify myself as an African. I view myself as an Aboriginal Black American. This is my country. This is my land. I'm not a foreigner to this land. Okay. I hate when people try to make me a foreigner. Make me a foreigner in my own land, in my homeland. I refuse to go that route, and I can't stand when people try to do that. So, but I'm an Aboriginal Black American. All right, so I'm gonna go to page 100 real quick. All right, I don't use the term Foundational Black American. I prefer the Aboriginal Black American. So I do not view myself as an African. If people have a problem with that, that's their problem. All right. This is my land. This is my homeland. America's my homeland. You know, there's certain Negroes who want to push to the African stuff on me, but I digress. All right, here's right here that I want to read off to you a little bit. Palenque. No one can tell me the true name of the ancient city now called Palenque. It is known to us by this name because the ruins are situated a few miles distinct from the town of Palenque, now a village, but formerly a place of some importance. The ruins are in the northern part of the Mexican state of Chiapas, hidden out of sight in the forest, where they seem to have been forgotten long before the time of Cortez. More than 200 years passed after the arrival of the Spaniards before their existence became known to Europeans. They were discovered about the year 1750. Since that year, decay made some progress in them. Captain Del Rio, who visited and described them in 1787, examined 14 edifices admirably built of hewn stone, and estimated the extent of the ruins to be 7 or 8 leagues one way along the river Chacamas, and a half league the other. He mentioned a subterranean aqueduct of great solidity and durability, which passes under the largest building. Other explorers have since visited Palenque and reported on the ruins by pen and pencil, but it's not certain that all the ruins edifices belonging to them have been seen, nor that the explanations have made it possible to determine the ancient extent of the city with which any approach to accuracy. The very great difficulties which obstruct all attempts at complete exploration have not allowed any explorer to say he examined or discovered all the moldering monuments hidden in the dense and tangled forest, even within the space allowed by Del Rio's half league from the river, not to speak of what may lie buried and unknown in the dense mass, trees, and undergrowth beyond its limit. The largest known building at Palenque is called the Palace. It stands near the river on a terraced pyramidal foundation 40 feet high and 310 feet long by 260 broad at its base. The edifice itself is 228 feet long, 180 feet wide, and 25 feet high. It faces the east and it has 14 doorways on each side, with 11 at the ends. It was built entirely of hewn stone, laid with admirable precision and mortar which seemed to have been of the best quality. A corridor 9 feet wide and roofed by a point arch went round the building on the outside, and this was separated from another within of equal width. The palace has 4 interior courts, the largest being 70 by 80 feet in extent. These are surrounded by corridors, and the architecture working facing them is richly decorated. Let me get a little more light up in there. Richly decorated. Within the building were many rooms. From the north side of one of the smaller courts rises a high tower, or pagoda, pyramid-like structure, 30 feet square at the base, where it goes up far above the highest elevation of the building. It seemed to have been still higher when the whole structure was in perfect condition. The great rectangular mound used for the foundation was cased with huge stone. The workmanship here and everywhere else throughout the structure being very superior. The piers around the quartz are covered with figures in stucco or plaster, which, were broken, reveal 6 or more coats or layers, each revealing traces of painting. This indicates that the building had been used so long before it was deserted that the plastering needed to be many times renewed. There is some evidence that painting was used as a means of decoration, but that which most engages attention is the artistic management of the stonework and, above all, the beautifully executed sculptures for ornamentation. 2 other buildings at Palenque, marked by Mr. Stevens in his plan of the ruins at Casa number 1 and Casa number 2, views of which are shown in figure 2728. I'm going to show that. And I showed you that in one of my earlier videos, are smaller, but in some respects still more remarkable. The first of these, 75 feet long by 25 wide, stands on the summit of a high truncated pyramid, and has its solid walls on all sides save the north, where there are 5 doorways within a corridor and 3 rooms. Between the doorway leading from the corridor to these rooms are great tablets, each 13 feet long and 8 feet high, and all covered with elegantly carved inscription. And I showed you this image before, stone stairway, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 doors you can walk through. Stairway, climb. And I showed you this actually, the real buildings, in one of my other books, I believe it's a color photo. A similar but smaller tablet covered with an inscription appears on the wall of a central room. Casa 2, number 2, consists of a steep and lofty truncated pyramid which stands on a terrace foundation. It has its level summit crowned with a building 50 feet long by 31 wide, which has 3 doorways at the south, and within a corridor and 3 rooms. This edifice, sometimes called La Cruz, has above the height required for the rooms what is described as 2 stories of interlaced stucco work, resembling a high, fanciful lattice. Here, too, inscribed tablets appear on the walls, but the inscriptions, which are abundant at Palenque, are by no means confined to tablets. As an ornamentation, the walls, piers, and cornices are covered with it. Everywhere the masterly workmanship and artistic skill of the old constructors compel admiration. And here's this structure right here. All right, and there's 1, 2, 3, like doorways. You know, and then sometimes we can. I don't have the color photo, but lots of times when the sun shines, there may be an opening in the back. It's noon or high noon, so the sun will go straight through. Light will go straight through. It'll light up and then go straight through to the other side. All right, but look at those structures. This is Palenque. So you get a good video viewer. Okay, Mr. Stevens going so far as to say sculpture human figures found in fragments. Injustice of proportion and symmetry. They must have approached the Greek models. Castle number 2 of Mr. Stevens is usually called La Cruz because of the most prominent object within the building is a great bas-relief on which are sculptured a cross and several human figures. This building stands in a high pyramid and is approached by a flight of steps. Dupac says it is impossible to describe adequately the interior decorations of the sumptuous temple. The cross is supposed to have been the central object of interest. It was wonderfully sculptured and decorated. Human figures stand near it, and some grave ceremonies seem to be represented. The infant held towards a cross by one of the figures suggests a christening ceremony. The cross is one of the most common emblems present in all the ruins. This has led the Catholic missionaries to assume that knowledge of Christianity had been brought to that part of America long before their arrival, and they adopted belief that the gospel was preached there by St. Thomas. This furnished excellent material for the hagiologists of that age. But, like everything else particular to those monkish romancers, it betrayed great lack of knowledge. The cross, even the so-called Latin cross, is not exclusively a Christian emblem. It was used in the Oriental world many centuries, perhaps millenniums, before the Christian era. It was a religious emblem of the Phoenicians, associated with Ashtar, who is usually figured bearing what is called a Latin cross. She is seen so figured on the Phoenician coin. The cross is found in the ruins of Nivelle. Mr. Layard, describing one of the finest specimens of Assyrian sculptures, the figure of an early Nimrod king, he calls it, says, round his neck are hung the four sacred signs: the crescent, the star or the sun, the trident, and the cross. These signs, the cross included, appear suspended from the necks or the collars of the Oriental prisoners figured on Egyptian monuments known to be 1,500 years older than the Christian era. The cross was a common emblem in ancient Egypt, and the Latin form of it was used in religious mysteries of that country. In connection with a monogram of the moon, it was to degrade this religious emblem of the Phoenicians that Alexander ordered the execution of 2,000 principal citizens of Tyre by crucifixion. The cross, as an emblem, is very common amongst the antiquities of Western Europe, where archaeological investigation has sometimes been embarrassed and confused by the assumption that any old monument bearing the figure of a cross cannot be as old as Christianity. One more will be found at Palenque, when the whole field of its ruins has been explored, cannot be reported. The chief difficulty by which explorers are embarrassed is manifest in the statement of Mr. Stevens. Without a guide, we might have gone within 100 feet of the building without discovering one of them. More has been discovered there than I have mentioned. My purpose being to give an accurate view of the style, finish, decoration, and the general character of the architecture and the artistic work found in the ruins, rather than a complete account of everything connected with them. The ruins of Palenque had deemed important by archaeologists partly on account of the great abundance of inscriptions found there, which, it is believed, will at length be deciphered, the written characters being similar to those of the Mayas, which are now understood. Copan and Carigla, I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly. The ruins known as Copan are situated in the extreme western part of Honduras, where they are densely covered by the forests. As already stated, they were first discovered by Europeans about 40 years after the War of the Conquest swept through that part of the country, and were at times wholly mysterious to the natives. The monuments seem older than those at Palenque, but we have only scant descriptions of them. They are situated in the wild and solitary part of the country, where the natives see as little of strangers as the Arabs about Mount Sinai, and are more suspicious. For this reason, they have not been very carefully explored. It is known that these ruins extend 2 or 3 miles along the left bank of the river Copan. Not much has been done to discover how far they extend from the river into the forest. Mr. Stevens described as follows his first view of them. We came to the right bank of the river and saw directly opposite a stone wall from 60 to 90 feet high, with fruits growing out of the top, running north and south along the river 624 feet. In some places have fallen. In In other entire, the great wall supported the rear side of the elevated foundation of a great edifice. It was made of cut stone well laid in mortar and cement, the blocks of stone being 6 feet long. Figure 29 shows the wall supporting perfectly. Okay, he saw next square stone columns standing by itself, 14 feet high and 3 feet on each side. If you can see, and I think I showed it. Like I said, I show a lot of this stuff in one of my other books. All right. From top to bottom, it was richly ornamented with sculpture design on two opposite sides, the other sides being covered with inscriptions finely carved on stone. On the front face, surrounded by the sculptured ornaments, was the figure of man. 14 other obelisks of the same kind were seen, some of them being higher than this. Some of them had fallen. These sculptured and inscribed pillars constitute the chief particularity of Copan. Mr. Squire says of them, the ruins of Copan and the corresponding monuments which I examined in the valley of the Chameleon are distinguished by singular and elaborately carved monoliths, was seen to have been replaced at Palenque by equally collaborate basso relievos, belonging, it was seen, to a later and more advanced period of art. The great building first noticed stands or stood on a pyramidal foundation, which is supported along the river by that high back wall. The structure extends 624 feet on the river line. Mr. Stevens described it as an oblong enclosure, and it states that it has a wide sterical, long enclosure, and states that it has I just read that, nearly 100 feet above the river, on which great trees are growing, some of them more than 20 feet in circumference. Here at Palenque, the ornamentation was rich and abundant. The ruins, greatly worn by decay, still show that architecture, sculpture, painting, and all the arts that embellish life have flourished in this overgrown forest. Some beautifully executed sculptures were found buried in the earth, and there can be no doubt that the extensive excavation, if it were possible in that almost invincible forest, will lead to important and valuable discoveries. Besides the great building and the monolith, several pyramidal structures are mentioned by Mr. Stevens, who points out that the extensive exploration is impossible unless one shall first clear away the forest and the burnt-up trees. Palenque, who described this ruined city nearly 300 years ago, saw much more than Mr. Stevens. He described the ruins of superb edifice, built of huge stone, which manifestly belonged to a large city. He mentions, in connection with the Great Wall, an enormous eagle carved in stone, which bore a square shield on his breast covered with undecipherable characters. He mentions also a stone giant and a stone cross with one arm broken. He saw a plaza, circular in form, surrounded by ranges of steps or seats, which reminded him of the Colosseum at Rome. As many as 80 ranges still remaining in some places. This plaza was paved with beautiful stones, all square and well worked. 6 of the great obelisks, which was described as statues, stood in this enclosure, and its center was a great stone basin. A History of Guatemala by the writer of name of Aloros states that the circle of the Copan, as he calls the plaza, described the Palenque, was still entire in the year 1700. He mentioned gateways which led into the enclosure, and he says that it was surrounded on the outside by stone pyramids 6 yards high, near which were standing sculptured figures or obelisks. No doubt remaining of this remarkable circus will be found now, if the forest should be removed. What else could be found there by means of careful and thorough exploration may never be known, for the region is uninviting, the forest very difficult, and such exploration will require much more than means and efforts of one or two individuals. Not very far away, the neighboring state of Guatemala, on the right bank of the river Motega, to which the Copan is the tributary, are the ruins called Kuriga. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. It is a manifest that a great city once stood here. These ruins have close resemblance to those at Copan, but they appear to be much older, for they have to a great extent become a little bit more heaps of rubbish over a large space of ground terraced of which has gone to decay and visible. Doubtless important relics of the old city are now more abundant below the surface than above it. Mr. Stevens, describing what he saw there, confines his attention chiefly to a pyramidal structure with flights of steps and monoliths larger and higher than those at Copan, but otherwise similar. He states, however, that while they have the same general style, the sculptures are in lower relief and hardly so rich in design. One of the obelisks here is 20 feet high, 5 feet 6 inches wide, and 2 feet 8 inches thick. The chief figures carved on it are that of a man in the front and that of a woman on the back. The sides are covered with inscriptions similar in appearance to those at Copan. Some of the other standing obelisks are higher than this. It seems reasonable to infer that the structures at Kriga were more ancient than those at Copan. All right. Go back a little bit. I don't know if you can see that wall. This is like a artist reconstruction. This book. Now, I showed you the color image. I don't have that book right in front of me, but remember I said before they had elevated bridges, elevated monuments. Stuff was elevated from the ground and built on top of the pyramids, and they had like 5 doorways or 3 doorways, like I mentioned. A lot of it may also do with the sun shining its light through the door, like I mentioned earlier, at a certain time. But also those structures, they're so high and elevated in the air, they were used as ancient observatories to study the sky and stars. That's why when you look at a lot of these flags, a lot of these symbols where they have stars, or they even design stars with a lot of these stone structured monuments in the ground, they had a lot of astrological meaning to it. All right, because they was in tune with nature, in tune with the stars, solar, lunar, and stellar. They was always in tune with the celestial heavens, as you may say. So they weren't just basically just some people just worshiping the sun. No, they was always in tune with nature. All right, and this is what our ancestors did. They built great structures. A lot of stuff is buried deep under forest because, like I said before, they had ancient highways, but they had ancient gardens near the highways. But those gardens have not been kept up for years. Now they have grown into be a forest. And so it shows you the greatness of our ancestors globally, and that was done here in America. So don't let people tell you that you're from Africa and that you're African. No, you are American. And if it upset, some Negro, especially from another generation, who talk about just one global Negro and be one, I can't get with that. Because the reason I can't get with that, because not all people on the B1 tip. All right, there's a lot of people who have exploited Aboriginal Black Americans for their own gain and greed, and we have been quote preaching B1, and they will B1 when it would suit their needs and their ethnicity, and other times, when it suit their needs at one particular time, though they B1 where they can get something, but when in other times the hell would B1. We need to start thinking about ourselves first and foremost. All right, as Aboriginal Americans. All right. Aboriginal Black Americans, and we need to. I'm not for the tribal stuff. That was part of the downfall of the Black empires here in America. And like I said in my other videos, now every single Black person was a good person in history. A lot of our downfall comes from fellow Negroes. We got to be honest with ourselves. If we really study our history, we have to be honest with ourselves. A lot of our downfall came from fellow Negroes. So this is something that we need to talk about, and I'm going to talk about even more. Some of these foreign blacks helped destroy the Aboriginal Black civilization here, along with Negroes here. All right, so this needs to be talked about and needs to be fully discussed. And I'm going to go even more in these. I talked about that in my other videos about these different tribes warring with one another. But this is just some information I want to throw out there, and that's from this book dealing with Palenque Copan, talking about his very different architectural structures that was built here in the Americas, man. This is our history. We need to claim our history. We're not stealing no one else's history. This is our history. We're not foreigners, so we're not, quote, African. We are Aboriginal Americans. This is our damn land. This is our home. And if people have a problem with that, that's on them, man. All right? That's on them. So this is just some information. I'm giving you some more information about our people and how that we are, quote, not African. We're not African. And unfortunately, like I said, some of my brothers and sisters are stuck in the Back to Africa movement, or we one global Negro. You're just going to have to let them stay stranded. All right? We need to move on and build what we have here before we can start helping out other people. We need to get our own family correct and straight. All right? You don't hear me saying these certain slogans, man, these little cute little slogans and everything like that, because no, that